So I wanted to say welcome, Agnes. Oh my goodness, I am so excited to have you here today. I know I say it every time, but it really is been quite spectacularly here. And when we had our, I've been kind of following you, and we had a brief discussion at a conference together, and but then we finally had our first conversation not that long ago, and it was just outstanding because you're out there pushing for change in so many ways that I'm passionate about. So tell our listeners today, you've really brought some expertise into this um, work that you're doing. Help them understand why I found that you were so smart. What have you been doing that got you there? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, thank you very much, Jessica, and just a warm welcome to all the people listening in. And of course, this is my absolute privilege being on your Thursdays with Third Path webinar because I've been also following and I know some of the guests that you've had on, and it's for me a great honor to be now one of them. So we have indeed met at a conference. It was the Work and Family Researchers Network conference, and I've been following your work. And basically, I got into the work-life field from a policy-making perspective. So I've been a lobbyist at the European Union level for 15 years, lobbying the European Commission, the European Parliament on different legislative proposals like the European Maternity Leave Directive, the Working Time Directive, and now very recently the new Work-Life Balance Directive. And in addition to that work, I was having that feeling that, just as you said very, very nicely, that we need to give people time today. I felt having these laws passed through European legislative machines takes so much time. Let's try to do something that has a better and more immediate impact on people's lives now. So we created with my co-founder the WorkLife Hub at the end of 2013, and we do research or coordinate research projects, and then we also help organizations, employers directly. And for any of you who are listening and you're interested, we have published a book at the end of October last year. It's called One Life: How the Most Forward-Looking Organizations Leverage Work-Life Integration to Attract Talent and Improve Employee Well-being. And the idea was to take work-life issues out from the abstract and try to make it very specific to management. How do you manage it? How do you make it? And it has one full chapter dedicated to Adidas, which is a German company based, their global headquarters are in Germany. And we had one day that we spent there last January in their work-life integration department. And I can tell you, I have seen the paradise. I have seen the future. I have seen the future, and now I'm just even more excited and passionate about helping other organizations and employers get there because I've
Wonderful.
seen that it can be done, and it's compatible and even symbiotic with success and profits.
Yes, that's the beauty of it all, isn't it? It's like the fun part of my job is that everybody wins when we get smart about this. But today, what are we doing? We're looking at some of the challenges. That's kind of the theme of the webinars this year is making the impossible possible. Because quite frankly, one of the things Agnes and I also talked about is, wow, with all, I mean, we've been doing this for so long, and it still feels like there's so much to do. There's still so many stumbling blocks. So all year long, we've been looking at what I thought were these brilliant change edicts from Anne-Marie Slaughter. How do we need to make change? And in particular, we're going to be looking at redefining the arc of a successful career today. Oh my goodness. And we're all going to do it in 40 minutes. So, stick around. We're going to cover a lot of ground. It should be a really good call. Now, one of the reasons you talked about why Adidas and others, and by the way, her book, One Life, is great. She's going to tell some stories from it today. One reason why these companies that are doing things differently are doing it, what are some of the big takeaways? Why do they want to do this? Why do they want to make this change?
So I think that there are different entry points to this, and none of them is uh, better than the other. I think the important thing is that they all want to achieve the same outcome for the employees. And, some people frown upon when the leadership decisions are made because of real estate downsizing, for example. I have seen organizations where they had to reduce their office space and therefore introduced agile working or smart working, where people, were all over the place. They were hot desking. But what it did was it really changed the mindset and the perception of line managers to presenteeism. And then they said, well, Peter, who used to sit here, is now at the other end, and I can't see him, and he's still working. So maybe Peter could also work from home. So
Hmm.
I think, there are all kinds of different motivations. There can be very personal stories, leaders who had, a child with a disability or a premature baby or divorce or all kinds of emotional events as well. And some of them just want to keep up with the times. But I think, all of them are good as motivators if they take you to a place where there's more transparency, where there's more trust, where there's more autonomy for the employees.
Yes, in fact, that was one of the fun takeaways from our conversation is that we started seeing that I always use this analogy. We both had gotten to the same room, she through public policy, me through our work at Third Path Institute supporting, people to make change today. And we'd both gotten to the same room where we saw, you know what? Some of these people are out there and they start here. They are in this. Oops, I want to get the little yellow one. They start here. So we've now been around so long. Met these individuals who, for a personal reason, they wanted to kind of create a more flexible approach to their work, and they got really smart both around changing where and when they work, but they also got really smart about how much they could work. Look at our webinar last month for more information about this. This is a critical ingredient if you want to live an integrated life. So they got pretty smart themselves, and then when they were promoted, they then actually started helping all of their team members to get pretty smart about it. And now we've been at it so long, some of them have gone on to become senior executives, and they're actually influencing change for the whole organization. And so this kind of personal story that gets people caught up into the desire for change was something we really saw parallel in our experiences. However, there was this interesting difference. You told me a story about a guy who was at the top, and his son told him something, and because of that conversation, he wanted to start doing something different. What was that story?
So in our conversation, preparing for this webinar, excuse me, we were, we're asking always the same questions of, is it just the small companies? Is it the large corporates? Is it startups? Is it, what about people who've been at the top for a long time? And that's when I brought up one of my favorite stories that's actually happened at the Sparkasse Köln-Bonn, which is a very large financial institution bank in the western part of Germany, where the chairman, who is, one of these leaders, 50 or 60 plus white male, having been socialized in the very traditional single breadwinner model and presentism, overwork work culture. Um, and the reason why I got to this organization is because I have heard a lot about their employee resource groups and workshops for new dads, new
Mm-hmm.
fathers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very intrigued, okay, so this is a very classic organization. It's an old institution, and all of a sudden they're teaming up with an NGO to support fathers with parenting skills and self-confidence. and how did that happen? And what they explained to me, the HR director explained that the chairman, his son is a millennial, and he became a parent, he became a dad. And he confronted his father and said, well, you know that I will want to spend a lot more time with my child than you have ever spent with me. And, this was a kind of a wake up moment. And then he
Yeah.
realized, well, okay, but I have all these young millennial men, potential fathers, future fathers, or new fathers in my workforce now. So
Yep.
maybe they're going through the same thing here. And so it's one of these very personal stories that I love because it got translated into action and positive change, of course, coupled with a very exciting context in Germany. One is the race for talent, real talent shortages.
Hmm.
Second, after the financial crisis, the reputation of financial institutions and employers has really been damaged. And the third one is Germany has introduced a very progressive shared parental leave for fathers. So, it's never just the inside of the organization, it's never just the context, if it's cultural, normative, or legislative, it's the interaction of both of these that triggers these kind of positive actions.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. Hey, audience, as you're listening in, you're getting a sense of how smart Agnes is. I mean, this is really, she's been working at this and looking at some great things. And there's more exciting stories to come. And for those of you, again, who are listening in for the first time, we do this part of the webinar recorded. We then have one of our integrated life advocates. These are the career counselors and couples counselors, work life coaches Third Path is working with across the country who help you think about these issues in your own life. So we're going to get Bryn Jones, talk a little bit about how she helps people around these things. And then at the very end of the webinar, we do a live Q&A just for the people who are here today. And that part won't be recorded. So you are rewarded for being here today. You're going to get a part of the webinar that nobody else gets to listen to. All right, so what am I doing with this little slide? It's taken me 20 years to figure out how to talk about this stuff. And I think a battery is a good image because if you think about it, over the course of a day or a week or a month, we all have a certain amount of energy. And if we're not careful to recharge our batteries, we can really get into trouble. And I think what's changed in this world in the last 20 years that I've been working on this issue is that the world has had less and less boundaries. And so in some ways, we've had to get smarter around setting boundaries. Otherwise, and I think it happens more this way than the other, work takes over our lives. Yes, sometimes our families or life takes over work, but I think there's lots of data that shows that too often work takes over our lives. And so what happened is we started looking at these people who got pretty good at boundary setting, whether or not they were hourly wage workers or professional workers, it didn't really matter. And we started seeing that they were, thinking about all three ingredients in their lives. I want time for work, I want time for my family, and these are men and women. And I also want time to recharge. And in order for me to really be my best self at work and at home, I need both these things. And so what you see in this picture is some people have learned how to set some boundaries. Some people have not really learned how to set boundaries. And what I believe, and I'm going to ask Agnes what she believes, is that, it's a skill set to learn how to set boundaries. But when you do it well, everybody benefits, you, your family, your organization. So first we're going to start kind of at the individual level. Have you seen this in Europe? Are you seeing people who are smarter about this? And also, is there stuff happening at the policy level that's helping people around recharge time and setting boundaries?
Absolutely. And first of all, I think your the hypothesis and the model that you have shown here is very valuable, and I think a great contribution to this whole kind of thinking, because it is really about, as you say, like a battery. It's about um, being aware of your energy, because
Yeah.
if you have spent all your energy at work, nothing's left for your couple or your children. If you are overwhelmed with things and you spend all your energy with a stroppy teenager, then your employer needs to know that. Then you, or if you have a newborn and you're not sleeping. So I think that the boundary setting is definitely something very important, and it is. Let me just say that sometimes people think, okay, when we speak about boundary setting, it is somehow going against flexibility,
Hmm.
right? Because they would assume, okay, does that mean that no more emails on the weekend or no more work in the evenings? I think you just need to figure it out what works best for you.
Yep.
And in this really hyper diverse workforce, that's a big challenge for managers because
Yep.
somebody will want to leave at 3 p.m., but will work, until midnight later on. And that's when they have their best energy. That's when they
Yep.
get their best work done. Others wouldn't mind being interrupted on the weekend. So I think it's very individual, but definitely there needs to be boundaries. And there are some macro level initiatives in France, in Germany, about when they introduced in Germany, in France, sorry, the right to disconnect legislation.
Yep.
Um, I'm not particularly sure it works, but Canada is now also thinking about introducing in their labor legislation a the law of the right to disconnect, because we know that people since we have email on our phones, people work 2-3 hours more per day,
Yep.
and this is unpaid overwork.
Yep.
So that's a very, very important thing because it's not quantified. I have tried to find figures about this, and I have found staggering figures from Germany about trillions of euros that people invest into their work because they're aided by these digital technologies.
Yeah.
So if you're in a climate of job insecurity, stigmatization, you will have digital presenteeism. And even if you're not at work, you could still digitally be at work. So now boundary setting is more important than ever before, I
Yeah.
would
No.
argue.
Thank you. And it's not so easy to do. Again, I really want to. That's one of the things we did have a whole call about it in let's see, today's December. It was really kind of amazing because this is hard stuff. I feel like here I am an expert in this and I failed more than I've succeeded around boundary setting. But the interesting thing about boundary setting is when you get better and better at it, you often find answers that are what I call triple wins. Good for you, good for the people you work with, and good for getting your work done. So you get smarter and smarter about how to do this. But the biggest obstacle, I would argue, to boundary setting is this whole concept of work first careers. So, what am I showing in this picture? And here's the sad news, folks listening in. Turns out some of this stuff is, not just an American problem. So, what has become very clear, through lots of research, lots of stories, is that, too many organizations reward the person who puts work first their entire career. And they're the ones who's going to get the bonus. They're the ones who's going to get moved ahead in the promotion. And quite frankly, they're probably the ones who are modeling what it looks like to be a leader at the top of organizations. And so there's this concept of, the ideal worker puts work first, and they're the ones we have to emulate and be in order to be considered serious in our careers or promotable into a leadership position. So, Agnes, is it true that the sad news is that this is a problem, even with all that progressive public policy, maybe with the exception of Scandinavia? Is this a problem in the other parts of the world, not just the US?
Absolutely. And recently we started working with countries like Africa and Asia, and there also, and even more so, it's a problem. So, I mean, what we discussed in our, I'm sorry, we're referring back to our great conversation that we had before, but sorry, folks, didn't hear that. But I have come to the conclusion that, we always point to Scandinavia and Iceland. Even in Europe, we say, oh, but in Scandinavia, yeah, but I've come to understand that there's some kind of an island on their own, or like because even in Europe, where the distances are very, very small, I mean, between let's say, Denmark and Poland, hardly any geographical distance, this didn't trickle over. So Scandinavian countries have a set of very important characteristics, like a very strong transparency, accountability, a very strong commitment to public services and quality public services. So a whole bunch of factors that make them Scandinavia.
Yeah.
So but even in Scandinavian countries, when you have global companies like Deloitte, for example, I'm sure they bring their own micro culture with them.
Yeah.
And we know from these the five big accountancies, the finance sector, the legal sector, where they work on billable hours. That's just the same in Frankfurt or Paris or Budapest as it is in the US. Some of these professions bring this with them, but um, the good news is, however,
Yes,
is
let's
that
look at
that
the good news. I think it's
yeah,
like jumping a few slides. Let's go here. The good news. Thank you. I mean, there's many stories we could tell. There was one you were talking about in Austria. It turns out there's also another widely published article about another company in New Zealand. It really happened, folks. I'm telling you the truth. Some smart leader in Australia and New Zealand said, hey, how about we have an organization that has a 32-hour work week and we still give everybody full pay? And they found all kinds of benefits. Tell us more about that. Let's get some good news out there.
yeah. So the good news is that um, I think that we're coming to a time when a lot of these leaders who put work first are retiring. And
Yes.
there's that's just what it is, because the biggest problem, I think, Jessica, for you, for Breen, for everybody listening, is that for these type of leaders, it's very difficult to unlearn these
Yes.
old behaviors, these patterns that they built their careers on for
Yep.
40 years.
Yep.
So they will retire and they don't have to unlearn anything, but there's a
Yep.
whole new generation coming in. And one of the companies that I have interviewed and met is e-magnetics from Austria. It's a digital marketing company. Arguably, it's not a hospital, so people don't have to be there, but
Right.
they could work, flexibly. But they didn't make a commitment, and the two founders, actually, they're almost job sharing the CEO function. The
Mm-hmm.
two founders, two men in their kind of 40s, early 40s, said, well, looking at the polls in Austria, every people express that they would like to work less. They would like to work around 30, 32 hours. The reality is people in Austria work 40 hours. So why can't we just try to give the people what they want? Which makes me so happy, because they didn't think, let's give them ping pong tables and fruit bowls.
Yep.
They said, what do they really want? So they gave them 32-hour work weeks with full pay. And they said, no emails on the weekend. And also, they had to a little bit restructure their customer service. So it's not a 24/7 customer service. And they have started that at the very beginning of 2018, and they have seen wonderful results. First of all, their employees are happy. They can go, they have actually quite a famous Austrian singer among their staff. They have people who do mountain climbing, who do cycling, who want to garden, the whole self. It really,
Yep.
that's the whole human. And when they have a new position, they have uh, increased the applications pro opening by 10. So a
Yep.
tenfold increase in applications. I think about 30-40% of income increase. And yes, maybe some customers were not that happy, but they have gained so many more new customers who totally resonated with this very humane approach to employees. He said,
Yep.
why would we want, to entrust our digital campaign to a slave trader. We
Yeah.
want to work with somebody who shares our values. And very interesting also to go and look at their clients, because it's ecological hotels. So it's a totally new generation of companies creating a totally new ecosystem
Yeah.
of work. And I
Yeah.
think that this is will have a very important trickle over and spillover effect.
Yeah, no, it's really wonderful. And the only thing wrong with this is that we're running out of time with you. So we can make sure we can have time with Bryn. I do want to underscore something she said. We're not going to talk much about it, but it's something worth listening to. So what I heard in the story is they got rid of 24/7 customer service. Yes, they lost a couple of clients, but the reason they gave those clients the change is because they wanted their employees to have a life, to be able to go out and recharge, learn new things, become more creative, come back and work better. And so ultimately, it turns out this world we created where we think we should have access to everything all the time instantly, well, maybe that's part of the problem too. Um, we aren't going to have time to talk about it. If you are on the call today, you're going to be able to hear Agnes talk about this concept of trust, transparency, and autonomy. I've added another word. You'll hear more about why when we do our Q&A. But those are the big three things that she's learned organizations need to get smart around to become an innovative organization. There's one more thing I want to put up there. So yes, we've been talking about the organizational side. But what we've been talking about also is the ideal worker. 80% of us in the US, probably across the globe, maybe not so much in some countries, become parents. And so there's this other element that plays into careers. How do we balance the family side of the equation around these career norms? And quite frankly, no big surprise, what we see is that people move ahead, put work first, which means that more often than not, they have partnered with somebody who had chose to create mostly time for family. Now, here's a question for you I didn't get to ask. In the US, we have a more growing population of dads who stay home full time, and the moms have the big job. So it's not just gendered in the US. There's a growing population of, stay-at-home dads, moms with big careers. Are you seeing the same trend in European countries, or is that a very US thing?
No, absolutely, definitely. And that's why, again, the European Commission is now pushing for an EU-wide directive on work-life balance that would include a specific earmarked parental leave part for dads to boost the participation of women going back to work and allowing them to go to work. And we see this as well, but there is still so much stigmatization around fathers as primary caretakers. I'm sure you also have heard a lot of these stories when men, when for example a school would always call the mother,
Right.
and then I heard um, your notorious RBG.
Yeah.
She
Yes.
was saying in an interview when she said for the 10th time, she told the school, this child also has a father. So
Yes.
there is, there is a growing number of families where they indicate, for example, the phone number of the father to be
Yeah.
called in case of an emergency. So there's very, very small steps in the right direction, but we as a society need to confront our unconscious bias about men as carers. And
Yeah.
I think these reflexes that we have, especially, Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, Africa, Kofi Annan, who used to be the Secretary General of the UN, he was for a while in Geneva, he was a single dad. And he said, as an African man, this was just a concept I would have never heard of. So
Hmm.
I think there's still a lot of self improvement or self reflection to be done on this.
Yeah, yeah. And what we're not going to get to, and again, so much is going to happen in the Q&A, but the truth is that Agnes has a pretty amazing story. She's actually physically located in Belgium, and she was telling me some of these cool things that are happening in Belgium. Mercredi, si papa, school ends at 12 or something like that on
Yeah.
Wednesdays. Yep. So now they have
Yes.
dads picking up the kids on the early dismissal on Wednesdays, and it's kind of understood that there's a whole group of men who are really paying attention to that. I thought it was really interesting to hear that they even have some laws now around divorce to promote shared care. So we'll talk more about how in Belgium Agnes's life has been shaped and influenced by some really good public policy there. So where are we getting to? We think, again, why we love Anne Marie Slaughter's 5 mandates for change, we think that these 5 mandates basically say we need to move to a world where there's gender equality, but not without also paying attention to family well-being. And the obvious answer for that is that we get men equally involved in caregiving, whether it's children, school-age children, teenagers, or aging parents. And as Agnes said, we really have some more room to grow around that one. I'm going to tell you where we're going next. We're going to be having Bryn Jones join us in a second and talk a little bit about how some of these ideas can be applied to your life right now. But Agnes, before we hear from Bryn, again, I'm moving us a little bit fast. Is there one more really important point you wanted to make? We will circle back. You'll be part of the Q&A, but one more important point you want to make, we want to hear it.
I would say that we will really get there faster if everybody would start speaking up.
Yeah.
And I think that way too many fathers, mothers, policymakers, or leaders are staying silent on their own struggles, on what they see in society. And I just think that we need to normalize all of what you have introduced. We need to normalize this. It needs to be part of staff meetings, of conversations, of news items. And so I think we need to speak up a little bit more.
Oh, wonderful. And I didn't even, that wasn't even a plug that I knew was coming. We
Oh,
actually had a whole year of webinars titled Courageous Conversations, because it's exactly what you said, Agnes. We need to have courage to have these conversations. And we've done a lot of work to figure out where some of that courage comes from. And if you listen, you can actually go to the Thursday with Third Path, a page that has these other webinars, and you'll be able to see. We've got some great information just specifically about that. So I was going to go down here. I can tell you which, if you just go right to, well, I'll tell you later. Anyways, without further ado, Bryn Jones, I am so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're part of Third Path. I'm so glad you're part of the ILA community. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've been listening in. What do you think about what you've heard? What really struck you?
Thanks, Jessica. I'm really excited to be here and a part of Third Path. Wow, so many things have struck me. I honestly, I came to this call thinking I'd say some certain things, and now I've taken all these notes, and I honestly am not sure where to start. I guess just really quickly, the quick version of my story. Most of my career has been in the nonprofit realm. Before I had kids, and I have 2 boys that are 8 and 6 now. I was an executive director of a nonprofit organization. And I tried to do some of these things in the organization before I had kids, and met great resistance. Some of the things that were brought up already, the I can't do it because it will benefit me was actually a really strong one for me. As the ED, I had a lot of power to make change, but was scared to make a lot of changes because it would very transparently, especially when I was pregnant, it would very obviously benefit me, and there was a culture around not getting direct benefit through our work. And so that was something I really struggled with. But so to make a long story short, I had my first son. I went back to work thinking I had a great arrangement with my board of directors to transition back in, working part-time from home. Realized that I did not have that support, and had a lot of struggle. I had board members telling me that they didn't trust that I could do my job working from home, and it ended up to be a real miserable ending, actually. The positive of it for me was it was a great experience because it encouraged me to start my own consulting and coaching business. And so for the last 8 years now, I've been working with other nonprofit executive directors and CEOs on how to do things better in their organizations. And this is one of the areas that I work with folks on, and Third Path's tools, which I wish I had found Third Path before I left my job.
Yeah, but look what you did, Bryn.
Other people do what I couldn't do.
Yes, look what you did in that story. You turned your personal challenge into something where you're helping promote change for so many people. It's really a profound and important story. Thank you for sharing that. There's something I want to underscore in it, and I actually have a little slide that I think will help us. It's hard. That's why down. There we go. This stuff is hard. The title of the webinars this year is Making the Impossible Possible. I know for a bunch of people listening in right now, what I'm talking about feels impossible. Bryn's story just illustrated something some of you might be going through right now. You're trying to advocate for yourself, and you're up against some big obstacles. This stuff is not easy. So, Bryn, how did you manage yourself through that difficult time? Because there's actually, people can give up. You can start going to exhaustion, self-doubt, hopelessness pretty quickly. How did you not go there? How did you regroup and turn it into this positive? And what advice do you have to others to kind of, manage through what can sometimes be very difficult?
Well, I can say in order to make it through myself, I leaned a lot. So I lead peer coaching groups of nonprofit CEOs and executive directors. And I was a participant in one of those at the time. And so I leaned on that group a lot. I leaned on the facilitator of the group a lot. I looked for other moms that were in the same position as I, which honestly at the time was really hard. I couldn't find anyone else who was an executive director of a nonprofit and a mom of young children or a first-time mom. So honestly, I think it's one of the reasons why I have been so attracted to Third Path and why I've brought Third Path frameworks and tools to so many of my clients. I didn't see other people doing what I was trying to do. And I got messages over and over that just reinforced what I was challenging with. So I felt kind of called to bring what I didn't have at the time to others.
Yes, yeah. In fact, I'll put up the positive drawing. So, what we've really seen is that there is a process. And what I hear you say is that, you got some support, and that can come from a spouse, that can come from a friend, that can come from a group. A critical ingredient as you're trying to make change, don't go it alone. And also what I heard you say is, there's a lot of people saying you can't do it. This is not how it's done. Well, what we're learning is that you can do it. You need to look for that solution that's good for you, good for your colleagues, good for getting your work done, that triple win. And you need to try to talk to people and say, well, actually, this isn't just about me. This is actually about more effective work solutions for everybody. And even when you do that, you might still hit some obstacles. So you might have another story or some more from your story that you want to share of practical advice, an example, a case study that would help people think about how challenging or how possible this is.
Well, I think I'm going to go back to the Agnes was talking about the motivators and why people do it, and it just really struck me as she was talking, because of my experience of I can't do this because it's going to benefit me. I heard, hopefully correctly, from Agnes that, and maybe this is a difference between the nonprofit sector and the corporate for-profit sector. I'm not sure, but this idea of I can't do it because it will benefit me really goes to the triple win. Focusing on the triple wins, yeah, it will benefit me, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
And it can benefit the organization, and it can benefit my team. And having thought partners to figure out how that triple win happens. So that's what I'm doing. Like one of my clients is a woman a little younger than me. She just had her second baby. And as she was pregnant with her first baby, she's an executive director of a larger organization. These things were becoming very present to her, and she wanted to make change, and she had the same things going through her head of, well, I can't do this because it would benefit me. But then she started looking around her organization and realizing, oh, there's also other young parents here, and there's others who want to become parents, and we're not set up well for that. And so I can actually use my situation as an opener to have conversations, those courageous conversations with my staff. And I gave her a lot of third paths tools, and it is now becoming normal in our organization to talk about these things, and they really set the intent on changing their culture and making these conversations part of their regular work.
Amen. Yay. Yeah. And back to where you started the story. I mean, we've been at this too long to not notice a pattern here, and we could hear it in some of Agnes's stories too about these very senior leaders who were making change because of a personal experience. We're talking about deep societal change in how we get work done, deep societal change around who does caregiving work, deep societal change around what does it mean to be a leader, and so I do think for us to have that courage, have the anchor, have the clarity, it actually does often come from something very personal. The early adapters, the original experimenters, they probably came from a very personal thing, and now we're expanding it out. But I really have seen a pattern that if you're listening in today and you have this desire to do it differently, pay attention to that. And as Bryn said, find some thought partners about how you can turn it into a triple win. Keep that experimental approach going. Things keep on changing. You might need to tweak it. But I think starting with some real clear values about what's important to you will help you make it through from the impossible to the possible. There's lots more we could say, Bryn. There might be one other story you want to share, an insight that you've had from your experiences working with others or on your own journey. Any thoughts you want to share?
I would just echo the idea that things are changing sort of organically as younger leaders step forward. I also co-led a community leadership program here in Arizona for emerging leaders, and they were almost all millennials saying, I want to lead my organization or other organizations, but I don't want to do it the way that leaders are doing it now.
Yeah.
And so even those older leaders that may still be holding on to sort of outdated ideas need to pay attention, because their younger workforce is wanting these things, and that is becoming a reality whether or not they want it to be.
Yeah. And again, not to throw all older workers under the bus. I know we're not doing that, but
Yes,
I'll tell you, we
that
have
is not my intent.
No, because there's actually a great story that we love of, and this can be a place for change again at a personal level. One of my favorite leadership stories is a guy who made a dramatic change in his life because he became a grandparent and he wanted to spend time with his grandson. So this stuff can really happen at all levels, but we're looking for change anywhere we can get it. So where we're going to go next, folks, is to have a Q&A where you can ask Agnes or Bryn your question. The Q&As are always a lot of fun. But as I mentioned, they're not going to actually be live. So it's just people listening in today who get to listen to the Q&A, the great questions that are going to come next. And, you know, don't forget, we got another Thursday webinar coming up next month. You can also find all of our webinars on iTunes or YouTube. And I want to thank you for joining us. There's lots of resources out there for you. Third Path has them. The WorkLife Hub has them. Bryn Jones is a great resource. So we're glad you're here. Thanks for being here today, folks.